Indivisible was at its absolute strongest, he showed up for a town hall and got his ass handed to him, right? And he was coming to North Idaho thinking he was in safe territory, and he was not. And we showed up and we drew a line in the sand and we shouted him down and we asked him tough questions and we made him show his true colors. And there's an article on the Real CDA about that. There's a lot of press coverage about it, but that event right there actually gained national attention. And if you remember, on his way to this event, he said in Lewiston, I believe, that no one dies from not having health care. And that was like, that was national news for many days. That was like front page news. Yeah, we do have a strong Indivisible group here. I had weekly meetings for like almost a year. But what I realized is that there was only a certain amount of people that wanted to do work, and then there was a larger amount of people who wanted to show up and just feel like they were doing something and participate, but didn't really want to be active. And so I think after me putting a year of my time into that, we coalesced the people who were going to work. I mean, Rebecca Schroeder came out of that group, who is now running for office here and is an amazing advocate for our message. And other people stepped in, but no one ever stepped up to the level that I did, where they kept having meetings and stuff. So it's kind of faded away as far as a regular meeting group, but we still have over 1,200 people in our Facebook group, and it's fairly active.
It's great. And that I think shows it might be hard to make changes in terms of who is in the legislature, but there's clearly room for some progress if there's that many people who are interested in progressive ideas.
I think what's going to happen is that like Boise, Moscow, Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, like I think what we're seeing even in like Oklahoma with these, teachers stepping up in the different states is like the cities are just going to continue to move forward and rural America is just going to continue to lag behind is what it feels like. And so I think even a place like Coeur d'Alene in this deep red North Idaho is going to be kind of a bastion,
I think that's spot on. I think the cities are going to change rapidly. That's where people want to come. I mean, Idaho led the nation last year in actual growth, which is fascinating. We also spent the least on our infrastructure. That's a different talk altogether. But I think that the cities are going to be bastions for progressives and Democrats. And I think for a long time, it's kind of been a faux pas to out yourself as a Democrat in Idaho. And so like that's changing. People are becoming more open about that kind of stuff, and so like that kind of paradigm shift is really helping. And so but it's a slow slog, and it's going to take a lot of work. We have a lot of work to do.
Is there anything else you guys want to make sure our listeners know about Idaho or Coeur d'Alene?
If you can, support our progressive candidates because they need help, they need funding, they need like online activism if you can donate to their campaigns. If you go to the Real CDA, you can follow them there. But that's like the biggest thing we need. We need progressives to win here. We need that so bad.
All right, maybe we should all take a vacation to Idaho to help campaign.
Volunteer, please.
Yeah. Oh my God. You would love it here. We live in the most amazing place, and
it is. I mean, gorgeous.
Truly, it is. It's absolutely amazing here, and it's growing like crazy. And I guess what I would say is that I left and went to San Diego for 7 years to live out my 20s because it's a little boring up here when you're younger. But I came back, and I just am so happy to be home. And Coeur d'Alene is so my home, and I'm just gonna fight for it with all the energy I can. I'm just so thankful that people like Alex are showing up, and there's a real change happening. But what I always have kept saying is that it's so important that while we focus so much energy on politics and, parties and legislating and all this stuff, that we remember that it's about community first. Have people over for dinner, have barbecues, have neighborhood gatherings. What really got us to this point, in my opinion, is letting our communities reach a place where we don't know our neighbors, where we don't know each other, where we don't spend time together. And I think that is really what's important. So everyone listening out there, the long-term goal, I hope, is to become a stronger society, because I have friends who are definitely more conservative than me, but they still come over for barbecues and to hang out with me because they know my values. And they'll vote differently on gun legislation and this and that, or argue with me about it on Facebook. But if we continued a friendship, maybe someday I'll have a moment, after everyone's gone and the dishes are done and we're sitting there having a beer, maybe I can say something that'll change their mind at some point. So I think relationships and community should always be number one.
Amen to that.
That's great. I love that message, and that's a nice, hopeful way to end this segment. So Listeners should check out the Real CDA podcast. It's a great podcast.
From spies to myths
and legends to world leaders,
the Bitchery of History is exploring the women who made history only to be forgotten by it.
We come out every week, Monday morning at 4 a.m. Pacific time, so get up early and get bitchin'.
Google Play, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Podomatic. Download every Monday, and remember, bitches get stuff done.
I'm here in this segment with my co-host, Sophie. Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And we are here with Aaron Swisher, who is running for Congress in the Idaho 2nd Congressional District. Hello, Aaron.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and why you've decided to run for Congress now?
My background is in economics and finance. I have degrees in both economics and finance, and it's really, for lack of a better phrase, it's the way I look at the world through that economic lens. I've been looking at this race in Idaho's 2nd Congressional District for about 6 years now, and a few years back I published a book that was a comprehensive economic plan that would not only strengthen our economy by raising wages, but it also addressed our energy usage, our environmental problems, our budgetary problems. It was kind of the comprehensive economic plan that our country should have and should be living by.
Great. So we can talk a little bit more about that as well, but can you tell us a little bit about the Idaho 2nd District? What part of Idaho is this? What does it encompass in terms of cities and towns? And tell us a little bit about it.
Most people would describe it as the eastern part of Idaho, but it actually stretches into Boise, and now it actually encompasses most of Boise as well. There's a few towns west of Boise that keep getting larger and larger, so the district gets pulled west more and more into Boise. Boise obviously is a fair-sized city, and there are a couple other large cities such as Pocatello, Twin Falls that lie within the district, but most of it is very rural. You have a lot of dairy farmers, potato farmers, but then you also have, like nuclear engineers near Idaho Falls that work at the Idaho National Laboratory. In Boise, you have a very large high-tech sector that does everything from designing computer chips to intellectual property protection on the internet. And so it's a very diverse district in terms of jobs, and that's probably how I would describe it.
But not a very diverse district in terms of race and ethnicity, I noticed.
That is true. It is a very white district, so to speak. Yeah.
But it looks like a fairly well-educated.
Once again, there's a lot of diversity there too. You do have a lot of engineers, particularly high-tech engineers, but then you also have a lot of the district who maybe isn't as educated as you would hope. Idaho as a state hasn't spent the money on its education system that a lot of us would like to see. It hasn't made that investment. There's a lot of places in Idaho, a lot of school districts where kids are only going to school 4 days a week because the education budget has been cut so much.
So one of the other things I wanted to ask about the district is that, it's been rated by a few of the rating agencies as sort of solidly Republican. I find that interesting since it does encompass parts of Boise. What is your thinking about that? What do you think is your path to victory in a district like this?
All of Idaho, and the 2nd Congressional District included, is very independent-minded. They tend to be conservative, but they're very independent. And people registered as independents are actually the largest voting bloc in Idaho. So while they tend to be conservative, it's obvious that they're willing to vote either way on that Democratic-Republican spectrum. I tend to think that a lot of people are tired of that Democratic-Republican spectrum. They realize that they are falling behind economically. Our economic system doesn't work for them. It's not fair for them. And they want somebody in Washington who is going to represent them and their interests rather than a specific political party. And so I think there's an opportunity in this district with the right message. If you can get that message out, for this district to go either way, either to a Democrat, a Republican, or even an independent if there was one in the race.
Sort of along those lines, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what the maybe top 3 or 4 most important issues are to voters in your district?
Yes, by all means. Education is big here in Idaho. I think there are a lot of people who don't feel like our state legislature has made the investment that they need to in our education system. Healthcare is a big issue in this district as it is nationally. And then I think a lot of people, care about those bread and butter issues of making sure they have a good paying job and that our government is working efficiently and effectively and managing its budget the way that it should. They would like to see the budget balanced. They want to see the United States have its fiscal house in order.
How important, given that this is an area where there is some tourism, a lot of hiking and mountainous regions, how important is environment and environmental considerations to the voters?
It's huge, and it cuts across party lines. There is a movement in Idaho, as well as all of the West, to privatize public lands. And you would think that that is an issue where liberals would be against that and conservatives may be for it. But there are a lot of hunters, there are a lot of fishermen, who maybe lean conservative but want those public lands kept in public hands because they use and access those public lands a lot. And there's a certain quality of life here in Idaho that people want preserved. They feel like they can live independently. They rely on the land, they use the land, but they want those things kept clean. They don't want their water polluted. They don't want their air and their soil polluted.
So let's talk some about your economic policy then, since you certainly know more about economics than either of us do. Could you talk us through a little bit? What does that plan look like? What do you think that Congress could be doing to really help stabilize our economy?
The big thing here is wages. Right now in the United States and in Idaho as well, we have a very low unemployment rate. And economists have always believed that if you got that unemployment rate low enough, that would lift wages. And I think if we could keep that unemployment rate low enough for a long enough period of time, it would do that. Unfortunately, keeping that unemployment rate low for an extended period of time is very hard. So I think there are some things that the government can do to step in and help bolster wages, lifting the minimum wage to something that, somebody working 40 hours a week can live on, making sure that the employment in the United States stays tight, making sure that our immigration policy works well with our economic policy, making sure that our trade policy is fair to workers in the United States. I believe that we should trade with other nations, but that trade has to be on a fair and level playing field for American workers. And then having a tax system that is simple and yet fair and deters greed, deters the corruption that we've seen that has really undermined our economy in the last few decades.
Those all sound like things that in theory would have bipartisan support. Do you think that if you were to get to Congress that you would find people on both sides of the aisle that would be supportive of these kinds of measures?
I would like to think so. I know a lot of it depends on exactly, the devil's always in the details, so to speak. So a lot of it depends on how the policies are framed, how they're paired up with one another. I am big about doing comprehensive solutions, things that maybe give one side the things they want, but also give the other side the things they want, but work together in a comprehensive way that is good for society, and bipartisan as well.
It seems like lately there hasn't been a lot of cooperation and bipartisanship in Congress. What you're describing about Idaho voters being fairly independent and not necessarily just picking one party or the other, but looking at someone who's really going to represent them. Do you think that that's something that is likely to change? Do you think that there are likely to be people in Congress in the upcoming session in Congress who are going to be able to work together and make things happen?
I am hopeful. I know that there is a large faction within our government, both Democrat and Republican, to be fair about it, that seems to be more concerned about their career and keeping themselves in government than they are about working across the aisle